right, so happy book birthday to Julia Quinn. First of all, a round of applause. I saw you guys all reading it. First off, can you just give us a little teaser into the book? What can we expect?
Is this on? Okay, yeah. So Eloisa is always yelling at me because I'm really bad at doing blurbs of my own books, but this book, it is my amnesia book. I decided after 25 books I finally deserved an amnesia book. And I also set it right here in New York, which is really fun and something new and different for me because all my books have been set in the British Isles. And that came about the way most things do. I wrote myself into a corner with the last book, and I had the man who was going to be the hero of the next book missing in the colonies, and then I had to figure out what to do with him. So I sent his best friend's sister over across the ocean, and she finds him and he's unconscious, and the only way she can take care of him is if she claims she's his wife, so she does, and it works. And then he wakes up and he believes her, and it sort of takes off from there.
All right, awesome. So welcome to everybody who's here today. This is the Strand's first romance novel panel, and I'm so glad that we've made it a success. Thank you so much. So I think that all of us here know that romance novels are a pretty big deal. They're a $1 billion industry. They comprise 34% of the fiction market in the United States. So I'm curious, why did you guys decide to write romance novels? Like, when did you start writing romance novels? Was it a conscious decision?
I started writing them because it was what I like to read. And you hear a lot of authors saying, well, I was reading books and they were terrible and I thought I could do better. And I had the opposite experience. I was reading books that I really loved and I wanted more of them. And so at the end of college, I did what any art history major does. I decided that I wanted to go to medical school. And I hadn't taken any of my pre-med classes, and so I had to spend 2 years doing that, which meant I couldn't get a full-time job. So I had a job working the phones, raising money for Planned Parenthood, and yay. Sorry. Let's just get that out. I just started writing a book in my spare time, and I ended up getting my first book deal the same month I got into medical school. Yeah, and so that was kind of a really big deal, and I deferred medical school for a couple years. I don't even know how we got on this whole subject. And then I had my mid-20s crisis when I decided I wasn't qualified to do anything because all my friends were going to graduate school. And so I took the shortest on-ramp onto the longest highway, and I begged the Yale Med School to let me back in, and they did, and I went for 2 or 3 months and decided this is all wrong, and I've never looked back. And I can vouch this is all true because my father-in-law is here, and he lived through the whole thing with me, so he's right up there. He can vouch that this is absolutely the true story. And his son, my husband, is a doctor, so I know exactly what I'm missing, and I definitely made the right choice.
Well, I started much less romantic. I started for money. I mean, you're talking about 34% of the market share in America. That's a huge amount of money. And I was graduated from Yale. I went to Harvard, then Yale. I had a lot of debt, as many of you probably do. But compared to my students now, because I'm a Shakespeare professor, right? It was nothing. It was $30,000. But it felt insurmountable. My husband said, we can't have a second baby. You have too much debt. And it was all me. So I had to pay it off. So I dabbled with mystery and realized to write a mystery, you really have to understand why someone would kill someone else. And they can't, you can't go endlessly into their childhood, right? Because Agatha Christie didn't do that. So I turned to romance, which I had loved reading in high school again. And I had read in all the way through my PhD to survive. Judith McNaught was like powerfully present in my queer theory PhD dissertation. People may not have realized that, but she was. And so I decided to write, and I sent it out. I wrote one book, which was based on the Earl of Essex, who I'd studied for my oral exams, who annulled his marriage on the grounds of impotence in the Renaissance. And so I wrote my first book on the basis of that. And I got I sent it out to 5 agents, and 4 of them were like, this will never be published. And the 5th one was like, let's give it a shot. And it went up for auction, and it sold for several $1,000s over my student loans. But I had to write 3 books. I never stopped.
So I'm the same. I can't separate me as a romance reader from me as a romance writer. And I started reading romance because my mom made me do it. I was an undergrad at NYU around the corner, yay NYU, and studying women in fiction, and she was like, you can't legitimately get that degree without reading the most popular and profitable books by women, for women, about women. And so I was like, fine, send me a syllabus. And she did, and I started reading them, and of course I was hooked, and then I started writing them because I was also pursuing creative writing at the same time. And I was kind of working with an agent, and I was like, Linda, I think I want to do this. She's like, if you write a romance, I'll represent you. And I said, well, I'll have one for you in 3 months, because I didn't know any better. And because I didn't know any better, I did it. And it took a long time to sell that book, and there was a lot of revising involved. But that was how I got started.
I started reading romance when I was far too young to be reading romance. My sister, who is 10 years older than me, was reading romance, and she was sort of shoving them under the bed to hide them from my parents. And I was like pulling them out on the other side, like, what is this? And then I really like fell for the community too. Like so I would hide my Joanna Lindsay novels inside my geography textbook in 8th grade, and the girl next to me, Lindsay, was like, that's amazing. I love Joanna Lindsay too. And she was also hiding her Joanna Lindsay books inside her geography textbook. And to this day, I don't understand geography in any way. But I am still like very best friends with Lindsay. And then I left and I went to Smith, where, you know, this bastion of feminism. And I was very terrified to tell anybody that I read romance novels. But inside my house at Smith, there was a giant library of secret romance novels that was passed from seniors down. And the marginalia was all about sort of feminism and like smashing the patriarchy and this whole sort of message of the heroine as the hero, and the whole book as an adventure novel. And I was like, this exists. These people exist. My tribe is here. How do I find them in the world? And then I went and I worked in publishing, and one night I got really drunk with a bunch of friends, and I said, I could write a romance novel. And my friend said, I dare you to. And I went home, and I had had just enough alcohol. And I wrote the first chapter of my first book and never looked back.
So how long did it take you all to write your first novels? You all have these amazing, like, I wrote my first romance novel stories.
I don't know that I can remember. Probably about 6 to 7 months for the first draft of that one, and then there were various processes of revision and sending it out. But I'd say probably about that long.
I'm the same. I know exactly, because I was at University of Virginia on I was a junior professor at WashU in St. Louis, and I worked on my academic novel, The Queer Theory, from 9 to 4, and then from 4 to 5, I got to write Potent Pleasures, which is a joke on how non-potent he supposedly was. And that took me 6 months, and then I just sent it out. I was like, oh, what the heck, I just sent it out. And I didn't know anything, so I sent out the sex scenes plus a letter. In case you're wondering, you should not send out the sex scenes. I was like, well, these are the hottest. This is what will sell it. And when my agent finally read it, she was like, you know, this woman falls down the stairs, and she breaks her leg, and she's never seen again. I was like, okay, just give me a minute. I had to revise.
I took 3 months for the first draft, and that was a very caffeinated binge where I learned that if I have 6 cups, I'm good, but more than that, I have massive anxiety attacks and think the world is ending. And then it took like a year or two with lots of, sending it out, getting rejection, crying, revising, sending it out, getting rejected, revising. It's a big part of the writing process and publishing process.
The first one took me 2 months, and it poured right out of me, and that has never, ever happened again. And I'm looking at some of my editors here in the front row, and they will all attest the fact that has never, ever happened again.
All right, so we're going to have this panel again in a year, and all of you are going to have a finished romance novel draft. I think that's what we're saying. Hopefully I will too. So you guys all write historical romances. Was there ever a point where you consciously made the decision to write historical as opposed to contemporary, or did you kind of just fall into that because that's what you love to read?
Well, Maya writes contemporary too.
I have a little contemporary series, The Bad Boy Billionaires. They're not as tawdry as they sound, sorry.
I started writing historical, again, because it's what I like to read, but I have a few theories about why I've stuck with it and why I think people like it so much. And for me, the era that I write in, which is mostly the Regency, which technically is like a 9-year period in, just think Jane Austen. So I write that or kind of thereabouts. And it's very much based in the witty repartee and the manners, and that works very well for someone like me whose strengths as a writer are dialogue and a fast pace, and my weaknesses probably are plot. I've been called the Seinfeld of romance. They're like, nothing really happens, but you love it. So things do happen, and that there is a plot. It's just there's a reason I'm not writing murder mysteries, because I think everybody would know who done it within 3 pages. But that particular time period works very well for me, but I think it's also very popular because it is modern enough that people think in a similar way to the way we think now. If you go a lot farther back, say to the medieval period, there's a sense of mysticism that pervades your life, and the church is such a big part of your existence. And it's not to say that going to church and that sort of thing wasn't an important part of society in 1815 England, but it didn't pervade every sensibility that you have the way it did farther back. So I can make my characters think in ways that modern readers can relate to. At the same time, it's far enough removed that there's a fairy tale quality to it, and readers can have a certain element of fantasy. I can let my characters, and I think more specifically my male characters, do things that I wouldn't put up with today. And it's not that it's even anything so awful, it's just things that nobody would do today. I mean, you wouldn't ever have to marry someone because you got caught in a garden with them. I mean, that just wouldn't happen today. So you can force your characters into situations in historical times that you can't do today, and you can create more of a fairy tale for modern readers.
I would say that I started the historical period because I was a Shakespeare professor, so I teach people walking and talking in the past every day. So that kind of language came very easily to me. If you read my books, you're going to read, the body tales, the body songs are actually Renaissance, not, say, 1780. But I think one of the things that's kept me there is kind of a variation on what Julia is saying, which is that I think if you set a book in the past, you can have the guy act like a complete raving asshole. And this is an enormously satisfying thing to read, right? I think one of the reasons why we have 4 historical writers here, plus Maya with dabbling in the contemporary, but yeah, but mostly historical, is that we can, in a sense, be the least feminist and the most feminist, because we can have a guy who really behaves like something where you want to have him imprisoned in the present, but at the same time, the woman always wins. So you're seeing a situation that would be not only frightening in some sense, but also really repugnant now. And it's not in the period, but at the same time, the heroine totally has him not on his knees, but flat out on the floor. That's my preference. An extra 5 pages of groveling never hurt any romance here.
I agree with all that, and I started writing historical because that's what my mom read, and that's what was on the syllabus. And it took me a few years before I realized there was paranormal and contemporary and all this stuff. But I write historical novels, but I'm really writing about today. And what I love about the Regency, in addition to all this, is the rules are really, there's a lot of rules, so you can really have fun with that as a plotter. And you are up against the patriarchy in a really, really hard and firm and unyielding way. And so it's really satisfying to write all the ways a heroine can subvert that or break it down or find happiness within it.
That's 100% right. I agree. I also think conflict is king in romance, right? There's the breathlessness of the romance novel. The reason why we all keep coming back to them again and again. My husband's always like, I don't understand. The end is always the same. I don't get it. He's read 3 of my books, and then he was like, I'm done now, I think. But But the truth is that the journey, we all know in this room, because we've all read a million of them, it's the journey, it's the conflict, it's the moment where as readers we say to ourselves, like, how is this ever going to work out? How are they ever going to get together? And how is he going to grovel for 20 pages, right? And I think that that's something that it's much, much harder to do in I'm great contemporary novelists, sort of romance novelists blow my mind, right? Because I don't understand how you sustain that conflict without someone being like, this guy's a jerk and I'm never ever going out with him again, right? Like, text you, bye, see you never, goodbye. Like, I'm gonna go find a decent dude. But in romance, you can't do it. And so in historical romance, you can't do it. And same as in paranormal, those sort of deeply conflicted moments in the book are the things that make it so breathless. They're the things that drew me to it in the beginning when I was, as a reader. They still draw me to it now, and I like to think that
I have to add, though, that I keep trying to write like a bad boy hero, and they always turn out to be nice guys. And I don't know whether that's my own sensibility or the type of person that I end up choosing. Gosh, this sort of reminds me, I just did an event in Atlanta where somebody asked, specifically to me, not anybody else, the question about, and she's referred to a very specific character of mine saying, like, do you think this can possibly exist? And I was like, I already said my husband's in the audience, right? And he's sitting there looking at my editor going like, I'm sitting right here. But I don't know, I tend to write, with all that stuff, mine guys still turn out to be nice guys in the end, I think, because my personal fantasy is not to change someone and not to tame them, but to be in a warm, loving relationship as equals. So I'm kind of the outlier on that. My guys don't have to grovel that much because they're never really that bad.
I mean, the truth is that we're all kind of like historically inaccurate in the way we present how the heroes think about the women, aside from a lot of the old school romances. Like, they're always totally cool with them learning and reading, and they don't hit them, and like, they're allowed to have their hobbies and see their friends. Like, they're historical, but they're really modern, empowered guys. Bad boys are nice guys or whatever.
Yeah, so I was just about to ask, what do you think are some of the difficulties of kind of putting your modern feminist ideals into these historical romances where there are different societal constraints? Do you kind of just bend the rules a little bit, or do you like to have fun playing within those constraints?
I'd say for the most part I play within the constraints. So for example, I wrote a novella recently where the heroine is very scientifically minded. She's really into astronomy. And what I didn't do was make her somebody who's banging down the doors at Oxford and Cambridge demanding to earn a degree, because this just takes place too far in the past. It wouldn't even occur to her that this is something that she can do. But what she can do is sort of fight against her constraints in smaller ways that are more obvious, figure out how to study, how to learn, how to do her own investigations, how to finagle her way into visiting, this previously off-limits telescope. So I do feel like I have to work within the constructs of and the constraints of the time period, because a lot of the ways that we as modern women would think we can fight against, the patriarchy or the rules or whatever, if you don't even realize how strict those rules are, and I honestly think a lot of women at that time had no idea, you can't really fight them in the same way. And so I have them fighting, these boundaries in a different manner. And I've written a number of books where the hero will say something to her, and of course I can't think of a specific example now, but she'll look at him and she's like, yeah, you totally don't get it. You have so many choices. You don't understand what it means not to have these choices. So even just getting women of the early 1800s to a point where they understand how many fewer choices they have and how the fact that they have fewer choices affects them is, to me, a very feminist moment in the book, especially because the guys don't even it doesn't even occur to them, oh yeah, I guess you can't do anything you want, I mean, if you don't have to think about it, you don't have to think about it.
See also 2017.
Crying.
I would say that I tend to be very, it's not a matter of bending the rules, but because I've seen sort of year after year of undergraduates go through my hands, right? And students, you all, you know, students don't go away, right? Your advisees come back 6 years later and they're trying something different. Now they want a library school, they want another recommendation. I've seen so many women start jobs where they say, there's a desire here, there's a need here, no one is fulfilling it, I'm gonna start my own company, right? That's one wonderful thing that women are doing a lot now. So I'm just finishing a series where all 3 women basically started their own company. So they see a need for something and they move into that. I think the difference here is that these 3 women had to be older, right? The women that Julie's talking about are younger, you're much more constrained. I had to decide, all right, I'm writing 3 heroines who are widowed, who are older, who are more powerful, who have money, who are able to say, right, my husband's dead, I'm gonna start a governance agency. I have no money, I'm gonna start decorating houses. I try to look always, because there were really interesting women doing incredible things in the period. You can look at them and say, okay, how would she do this? And how would she do that? And the key there is I'm looking at extremely privileged women, right? But my father was a poet, Robert Bly, and so I grew up in a poet's household on a farm, which means that all my heroines are rich, like seriously rich. It's not even an issue. So I'm dealing with privilege plus money, and now we just figure out what we're going to do that will be interesting, that will be fulfilling, and we'll start a job.
I go back and forth with my heroines. Some, like, what's her name? Claire, in Lady Claire is All That. She's based on Ada Lovelace, and I really wanted to write that, like, brilliant mind who just has the hardest time just getting in the room, let alone convincing everyone to listen to her. But then I also write you know, a heroine like her sister Bridget, who's like shrinking herself and her personality and her body and whatever to just fit in and be accepted. And so I love to write the like very clearly feminist heroines, but I also like to write what I think of as just like the everyday, every girl heroine that's just like trying to, you know, be true to herself in a world that doesn't maybe want her to be. And I think both of those are real and make good stories.
I think it is a difficult argument to make to say that women in history haven't always had power and seen the struggle that women in the world have to go through. And I often, whenever I sort of really struggle with this, I think about 2 things. I think about Wollstonecraft, right? Because A Vindication on the Rights of Women was published in the 1760s. Somebody here probably knows better than me, but it was definitely out. It was definitely a thing, and she was vilified by the world, but also at the same time was honored by women. Women read that book a lot in the world. And then I think about Elizabeth Bennet, because it feels like she's sort of the seminal romance novel heroine, right? She's the one we all stand on the shoulders of, and she's not a weak character at all. She like pulls on her boots and like walks out into a muddy field and saves her sick sister and like happens to fall in love in the balance, but she refuses to marry him in the first time. And I mean, she's very powerful, and she's not moneyed, and she stands strong for herself. And Austen was unmarried and stood strong for herself and like fought for her money and you know, fought to publish. And so I think there were, when you write in the 1800s, when you write in the 1700s, I'm obsessed currently with harlots. You should all go home and watch Harlots, right? Because I'm obsessed with prostitutes in general over the course of history, because I think, like, I always say, like, if I had to travel back in time, I would absolutely become a madam. Like, that's where the power is. Like that's where I'm going. And like women know that sex is powerful, right? Like, and I think that's another thing that comes of romance novels that we give to readers and that we get as readers from romance, is this sense of sex being powerful and our identity as sexual beings being powerful, and women take power where they can, and they always have.
I just have to say, I'm married to a professor of infectious diseases, so I do not want to go back in time and be a madam. I just, I know, we once got, we get direct mail stuff from all the drug companies, and one time we got on, cardstock, like really expensive paper, this thing, and addressed to him, of course, and said, "Finally, the syphilis treatment you've been waiting for." I mean, all I'm thinking is like, oh my God, what must the mailman think of us? You know, like, so anyway, you can be madam. I'll stay here and get my vaccines.
I just figure I won't be a duchess. So, you know,
I
what am I
am
stuck
be a
with?
duchess.
Hold out for a
What
duke,
if you-
Sarah. Haven't you learned anything?
What if you can't choose, you guys?
Sorry.
What if you're plunked down in Covent Garden? What do you do? It's an important question.
As a duchess, I would just pull out my foot meds and take me off.
I'd start growing like mold and trying to make penicillin.
On the streets. Eat this mold, I promise you'll be better. Eat this mold, you'll sell your mold.
Sell my mold, yeah.
All right, well, I want to seamlessly transition into a conversation about female pleasure.
Start on that end. She wants to be a madam.
So one of the major feminist components of romance novels is that they really champion the idea of female pleasure. Why do you think that this is still such a revolutionary idea in 2017, and what are romance novels really doing to change that?
It's probably less revolutionary last year.
I didn't mean to look at you. Anyone can answer.
No, I mean, sex is a source of power, right? I mean, it's a source of power on a number of levels. It's powerful because it involves dominance. It's powerful because it involves identity. It's powerful because it involves procreation. It's powerful because it's wrapped up in the lifestyle of a woman as mother and all the things that we expect of women and their eternal sacrifice. I mean, like, sex is an incredibly powerful thing, and when you lift it up from media and other sort of places where the masculine identity is king, so pretty much everywhere, and you set it down in romance, and we say women are allowed to have pleasure, and they are allowed to expect pleasure from their partner, and they're allowed to say no or yes or when. Who? You all get it. That's where it all exists, and so of course it's terrifying, and of course it's judged harshly. The elephant in the room is that romance is super judged, right? I mean, the covers, the everything get mocked, and they get mocked because it's porn for women, and
as if that's a bad thing. Yeah. So coming from my undergrad days, the thing that really struck me about sex in romance novels versus all the sex I was reading in my other 18th and 19th century literature for school is that the heroines had sex and lived. They didn't die. And that's the big distinction between, I think, romance sex and like almost all other sex. At least in literature. Like, she gets to have an orgasm, it's good for her, and then she lives happily ever after. Whereas, Madame Bovary, who else? Clarissa, Anna Karenina, they have sex and die. So, for that alone...
Every Bond girl.
Like, that I think is the most powerful thing about the sexy times in a romance novel. And then she lives again and again and again. It's very multi-orgasmic in multiple senses.
I totally agree with what you guys are saying. I would say one thing is, if you're looking at pop culture as a whole, pop culture tends to break down into subcultures, right? And I always think romance is one of the most fascinating subcultures that exists within popular culture, because a lot of pop culture tends to be a culture that argues against, in a larger sense, hegemony, or in this case, the patriarchy. And it's something, because of the way pop culture is kind of denigrated as a whole, we can fly under that flag and like no one notices that we're 30% of the market share of every book sold, right? Nobody notices that there are women earning their living, let's just turn to authors for a second, earning their living, supporting families all over the US. I mean, thousands of authors writing romance, right? Largely paid for by young women, old women, women of all ages. So we have this market economy existing underneath the shelter of romance, which is partly about pleasure, For sure, but it's about way more than pleasure. I think that just to put it to pleasure ignores the place we're holding within pop culture.
I'm not sure I have a whole lot to add to all that. You guys did such a good job on it. But it did sort of make me think about some stuff I'd read recently about. So how many of you have been watching Outlander? Yeah, it's really good. Okay, and I've read the books too, but it's this wonderful series. It's on Starz. It's based on Diana Gabaldon's series Outlander. And, you know, they're like, it's the female Game of Thrones. Well, that kind of bugged me a little bit. I was like, well, no, maybe he's actually the male Outlander. I don't know. But one of the articles I read about it, they were talking about the sex scenes as they're portrayed in the TV series. And we're not talking necessarily the book, but the TV series. And they kept saying about how this is the female gaze, the female gaze. And, you know, I was thinking, like, you know, what are they talking about? It's like, look at this, it's wonderful. And then I went and watched Game of Thrones, and I finally got what they were talking about, because I hadn't really been watching it. And in it, you know, this is a woman who can take charge, and she can, again, she has pleasure, and she doesn't die. Well, she almost does several times, but not because of that. And he almost dies more than she almost dies. And I think, for me, I just really like portraying a healthy relationship. And in some ways, that's like the most revolutionary thing you can do in literature, is to portray a healthy relationship. And perhaps it takes some ridiculous moments or bad moments to get there. But I think that part of a healthy relationship between two adults, you know, if they are choosing to make their life together, is that sexual relationship, and it had better be equal. You know, it can certainly start out from places of different levels of knowledge, especially if you're writing something set in the 1800s where society is saying she better be a virgin and he probably isn't, although that's not always what we do. But I just think I'm like rambling here, but I just think if you want to write about a healthy relationship, that's a good thing. And I have a lot of trouble with people who are saying to me, don't you think you're raising people's expectations? Don't you think you're making them want, you know, something that's not real? And I feel like saying, you're writing about serial killers. I'm writing about two people who fall in love and live happily ever after and are committed to each other. I hope what I'm doing is more realistic than what you're doing.
Or we should be raising expectations.
Or we should be raising, yeah. I mean, and the number of women who have written to me who've said things like, I didn't know what I could look for and what I could hope for in a relationship until I read your books, or now Eloisa James's books, and Maya and Sarah's books. And it, you know, it has made me realize how privileged I was. You know, even though I grew up, my parents are divorced, so I didn't have that much of a close model on a good marriage. I still knew what it was, and I knew what I deserved, and I knew what I could work for and hope for. And it stuns me sometimes how many people are out there who don't know that, and who don't know what they deserve, and how they should be treated, and how they should treat others. And so that's what I want to portray, and I think that necessarily includes a sexual aspect too, if you're writing about two people falling in love.
I got to add something to that. We all get the same letters from women saying wonderful things, but my favorite are actually the letters from guys. And they're like, you gave her very unrealistic expectations. No man has equipment like that, and no man could ever do it that many times. So I'm like, what? How old are you? Like, oh. The amount of ignorance among the male population is insane. Not just women, also men. So, I mean, mind you, they only write us in moments of despair when she's left. But, you know, maybe on the next relationship.
So do you ever bother to respond to any of these letters, or do you just let it slide?
I respond to all of them unless they are really vituperative. And sometimes you do get people who are just so angry they can't control their own. But basically what they're saying is, something here hurt me, right? Something here led my wife or my partner to think there's something better in life. And so they're just expressing pain. I think often when we get negative letters, it's and what can you do? You know, you just write back, and they never write back again, but whatever.
So how do you think romance novels are working not only to empower women, but also kind of dismantle toxic masculinity?
Setting a good example. There's so much out there for men to look at that teaches them to aspire to this toxic masculinity. And if I could put something out there that doesn't, hopefully that can fight it.
I would say one question I get asked is, would you let your son read your books? And I have to say he's never shown the slightest bit of interest. But if he did, right, of course I would. Because if he did, he would see a sexual relationship that was equal, in which anything you do, someone else can do, that everyone has consent. I mean, I don't think we can have a better example out. And that is in romance across the board. And it doesn't matter if it's BDSM or whatever it is, erotica. We have that baseline acceptance on both sides, which is not happening in the world, obviously.
Yeah, I think more men should read romance novels, and every time I read the, like, here's what women want, or what do women want, I just want to, like, hit them over the head with some mass market paperbacks and just be like, just read this. And it's like, we want you to be loving and communicative and attentive and not a douchebag. Newsflash.
I don't know, man. I feel like my answer would have been different in October.
Oh, yeah.
So we have alpha heroes in romance, right? And we talk about it, and romance writers and readers throw around the word alpha so much, and it can be so toxic, and it is toxic in a lot of romance novels, probably more than I would like to see. And I think the key to the hero's journey in a romance novel, if you're writing sort of a really bad dude, unlike Julie's dudes, if you're writing, a bad dude who needs to if you need to turn the ship around, and we've all written those dudes, then you have no choice but to show them sort of toxic at the start, and then the evolution of their identity becomes, they never lose their full alpha, but they become more human and not douchey, right? I was writing a book called The Day of the Duchess, which is out at the end of the month, and I was writing it. I had written 275 pages on November 7th, and then the election happened, and I opened the document on November 9th, and I wanted my hero to die in a ditch. 275 pages into a book, this is not a good time for an author to be like, I hate this guy and I want him to die in a ditch. But I called my editor and I said, Donald Trump won and now I have to go back to the beginning. And she was very lovely and let me do it because I think she was also having this sort of like emotional moment. And I did, I went back and I changed a lot of the story so that it suddenly he was a hero I could love and who I could sort of put into the world as a masculine, honorable guy who we could all fall for, even though he'd made mistakes in the past. And that is this book that comes out on the 27th is a book that I would not have written if not for...
I got to read it. You guys have to
read
read
it
this.
too.
Oh my God. He's so hot and he's so desperately in love. That's the guy we all wish we had.
They both behaved badly.
They did.
They did.
I mean, but no, so the point is that like, when you talk about toxic masculinity, I feel like you're talking about a very different thing now than then. And I think we all as writers are thinking about it. And every writer I'm talking to now is thinking about it.
My next book is It's Hard Out Here for a Duke, and I wrote it before the election and then went to revisions after, and I was like, I just wrote a book about the hardship of being a white rich man. Like, what the fuck do I do now? So coming soon, pre-order now. It's really hard for these guys, but I do, in my snarkier moments, I wonder, like, the billionaire romance was huge until maybe November 9th. Yeah. And like a lot of women read books where the billionaire know-it-all guy came in and saved the day. And I wonder if that's a factor in the world.
I mean, I still like a billionaire. I just don't like one specific billionaire. And I don't want him to be anywhere even remotely near my romance novels.
Or any women, actually.
Yeah, or women in general.
But I think one really interesting thing here is that people are like, where did you get your formula, right? There is no formula. There's what you're thinking at that moment and what you put together with your past and what you think of your father and your partner and that creates the romance, right? It changes. It definitely changes based on what's happening. I do think that billionaires are having a bit of a downfall. My guys are not going to be poor because that's just like not going to happen.
And you guys were always good guys, so you're safe.
They're good guys. I thanks. You raised my husband. I don't know. I'll just bring it back. I just want to write about people and the types of relationships I would like to be in and hope that, you know, and I don't do it with any grand dreams of anything other than giving you a good time. But, you know, just I'm writing for entertainment, for your enjoyment. I'm not trying to teach. I'm not trying to change the world. I'd like to change your afternoon and have you have a happier day, but I'm hoping that people will take something away from it and just, whether they think about it consciously or not, choose perhaps to live their life in a different way, to be kinder to other people, to respect other people, to raise their children differently. I mean, I have a son. I don't talk about my kids very much online, but I have a son, and I still remember the day when he was about 10 years old, and he came up to me and goes, what is feminist? And so I explained it to him. I think, okay, well, how do you explain this to a 10-year-old? And I said, well, basically, you know, you believe that, you know, men and women might not be the same, but they should have, you know, the same opportunities to do what they want and be the person they want to be. And he's like, he kind of looks at me like, oh, like, duh. He's like, all right, I'm totally a feminist, and he walks off. And that was that, and that's how it should be. It should be that simple, and so I'm just trying to make it that simple in my writing.
So I think that probably one of the most important parts of being a feminist is always striving to be more informed, more educated, more empathetic. What are some of the gains that you think could be made in the romance novel genre in the next couple of years, especially now that we're living in a whole new world?
We have to be more intersectional. I mean, we've come so far, you guys, like in the sense of the book, the Flame in the Flower in 1972 was so, I mean, Brandon Rapes, help me, what's her name? Heather 4 times in the first 100 pages of that book. Like, I mean, there's so much about it that's so problematic, and it's all the things that we say about romance, and I feel like we've come so far from where we were. But Brandon was a slave owner, and we never talked about it, and we don't talk about slave owners now. And like, the world needs to be more intersectional, and romance speaks. I mean, we are the largest subset of the fiction market, and it is our job to do this as writers.
What she said. And more diversity, same thing, but more, just more of all different things. Of writers, of characters, of settings, of time periods, and I think also not being afraid to really tackle the less awesome parts of history or relationships or whatever. We are known as the escapist, fluffy reading, and I think we can still be that, but really confront the harder aspects of lives and barriers to love and happy, fulfilling lives. And I think that's our job, is to take those conflicts and resolve them happily.
I think it's a really complicated issue, right? I came up with an idea of writing an Indian heroine who was based on a real Indian princess at the time I was writing. And she was fantastic. She was behind a curtain with her mother, and she was like, I want him. And her mother went and invited the guy, who was a young lord, over to his house, and next thing you know, she was pregnant. And so she couldn't marry the 85-year-old man that her grandfather had engaged her to. And I was like, I'm gonna turn this into a book. Well, you know what? I couldn't. What we need is more diversity, among authors who maybe can own that story in a way that I wrote 100 pages and I was like, this is a disaster, right? For me to be sort of eulogizing in this, I mean, I had a very complicated plot. I can promise you my white guy was like against the East India Company. He was anti-colonial. He was perfect in every way, and the whole thing was a complete freaking disaster. So in a sense, we have to own what we can write and make space for things that we can't write, right? Make space for other authors up here who aren't us, who can bring those other stories and make them just as attractive to everyone, and not be me trying to own something I can't own. So.
I really have to echo that. Somebody asked me that question recently about introducing more diversity into my books. And it's difficult because first with the time period that I write in, I mean, some say, oh, well, it really was diverse. I'm like, well, not among the dukes. And granted, my people aren't quite as lofty as Eloisa's, but it's tricky because, you know, you read these Civil War romances, and they've been kind of out of fashion for a while, and you're like, you know, isn't it interesting that, you know, the heroine always seems to feel that her slave is really, truly her equal? And I'm thinking, well, she wasn't raised that way. She'd have to be pretty remarkable to have figured this out on her own. So if she's gonna feel that way, you need to explain to me how that came about. And a lot of times they didn't. And so, you know, I think, okay, I want to introduce diversity into my books, maybe put a Jewish character in there. There were Jews in England at the time, but you know what? A lot of people really didn't like them. And for me to explain why my characters, who I like to think are fundamentally good and kind and true, suddenly find these people to be perfectly fine and, yeah, sure, marry him, no problem, you know, we don't care. I'd have to come up with a really good explanation of how that came about, and that might have to be the story more than the actual love story. So it's tricky to do. And then there's the added thing of, you know, I can be a lot of things. I remember this once trying to play with a toddler, my toddler, but whatever, and I realized what I really needed was another 3-year-old to play with him, because I can be a lot of things to my kids. I couldn't be another 3-year-old. I can't remember what it's like to do that. And for all the things I can do, I don't know what it's like to be in another person's skin. And I especially don't know what it means to be in another person's skin when their skin is so very different from mine. And I mean, it's hard enough at times just to write being a man, because I do write from the male point of view too. And I remember once when I was in college, really distinctly, I was walking from my dorm to my boyfriend's, the guy I married, and some guys kind of harassed me. And I never felt unsafe, but I felt uncomfortable, and I felt angry. And I couldn't do anything in that moment other than just kind of like steel myself and walk past them. I certainly did not feel empowered enough to talk back to them, and in fact, it may have been foolish to do so at that time, I'm not sure. And I told him about it. And he said to me, and let me tell you, this is the most feminist, this guy, I mean, he's a good one, okay? I mean, this is the guy who, if he doesn't have time to research all the candidates, is like, just vote for the women. And so he just looks at me, he goes, well, if I were there, I would have said something. And I said, well, if you'd been there, they wouldn't have said something. And it was just in that moment I realized, like, he has never had to walk down a darkened hallway as a woman and to know what it feels like to have somebody say something to you that makes you feel small or makes you feel unsafe. And in that way, I don't know that what Eloisa was saying about owning something, I don't know that I could write a story where really getting into what it feels like to be that marginalized, because I am privileged. I have never had to be that marginalized. And so I do think there's a lot to be said for making room for all sorts of authors to tell their story, or at the very least, if I'm gonna try, I need to talk to them, and I need to ask them, and I need to figure it out, because I don't want to appropriate it and claim something as my own that I really don't know enough about to do a good job for.
I'm just going to add that Sonali Dev wants me to send me the story, and she's going to write her point of view. And I'm going to write my white guy's point of view. Maybe that's where we go.
Awesome.
Christina, could I just throw out some own voices recs right now?
Absolutely.
For historical specifically, because we're all historical, so I assume all of you read historicals. I would read Rose Lerner, who has written several Jewish characters in the Regency. Vanessa Kelly writes people of color in the Regency. I'm sorry,
Cole.
Vanessa Riley. I'm sorry. There's also a Vanessa Kelly who's great. And there's Alyssa Cole and Beverly Jenkins, obviously, who write American Set. And then I would recommend KJ Charles, who writes queer romances in the Regency, also with people of color. And Kat Sebastian, who writes queer romances in the Regency. And I'm just going to put in a plug for a future historical romance writer who is just recently signed by Avon. Alexis Hall is writing historical queer Regency, we think. Stay tuned for that next year.
Wait, is that you? Oh, congratulations.
No, this is not Alexis.
Okay.
This is Alexis.
The editor, where you're like talking to her, like, you know.
Whom I am stalking for this book. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. We just have a couple of minutes left, and I do want to open it up to questions from the audience. So I was thinking we could take like 2 or 3 questions. I'll come to you.
Discussed a lot today in terms of feminism, the relationship between the woman to the man, etc. One of the things that I enjoy about romance, and I'd like to get a little bit of your thoughts on, are the relationships between women and heroines to other women in the book, and how feminism can be played out in the relationships between women. And I'd like you to discuss what you believe you've seen that is admirable for that, and what you would like to see that has not yet been seen for that. Oh, and I'd also like Maya's mother's syllabus, if possible.
Do you know what? I can't effing find it. It is like 4 laptops ago. I know. I looked in the book. We didn't put. This is lost to
We
history.
all know her mom,
We're
actually.
gonna publish it on
She could
Bustle.
totally email her. She'll have it.
Here's what I can remember is on it. All of Jane Austen, Kathleen Windsor's Forever Amber, which I read, and it ends not like a romance novel. And after 600 pages, I called my mother and I was like, what the F is this? And she goes, read Kathleen Woodiwiss and call me in the morning. And so I read Kathleen Woodiwiss, The Flame and the Flower, and 20 pages in, he's raped her 18 times. And I'm like, how is this gonna end happily? And it does. But I was captivated by how those conflicts are so great and how you really take your characters on a journey. I think you two were definitely on it, probably. I read you very early in my days, so sorry.
She's a baby. I was on that.
So that should keep you for a weekend. But to your question about female characters and relationships in romance, this is my favorite thing. Like, a lot of my series are not, the Band of Dukes or the Family or the Band of Earls. I write about like women's relationships, so I have my writing girls who work. By the way, I'm so willing to throw historical accuracy under the bus for a great story that speaks to my modern sensibilities. So if that's you, come buy my books. If not, don't. My Wallflowers was, about 3 heroines, best friends who are just like, shit, we gotta get married, like, now. And then I've written The Family and The Sisters and all of this stuff, but that is one of my favorite things to explore is female friendship. Because those are some of the greatest, richest relationships in my life. So, and I haven't had a romance that my girlfriends weren't, every step of the way involved. Well, until the wedding night, but anyway, yes, there are lots of female friendships in romance. Go.
I think Eloisa should talk because, you wrote your sister books, and I'm wild about them.
If you're a romance writer, like if any of you are would-be romance writers or romance writers, one of the things you have to figure out right away is what you do well. Like Julie's kind of told you what she does well, right? The relationship, we all want to live next to these people. We want to marry him. We want to be sisters. One of the things I do is I write sex outside really well. It's arcane, but it's mine.
It's good to know.
And meadows, barns.
Oh, it's getting hard at this point. I've written so many. We've done canoes. We're past that. We're
I think
into
you
the
need a
snow.
mountain.
But I also write female friendships really well, and I think it's the same thing you're saying, is that when you put a really alpha asshole, right, together with a woman, she better have a bunch of girlfriends saying, that's an asshole, you'll never go with it. Because it sort of gives a reality to the story. It gives it a grounding in all of our lives. And I think one of my favorite books is one where two women are sitting together and one woman says, what do you mean you don't know what he looks like? And the other woman's like, well, I think I remember, but I was 9, and they're talking about her husband. And I think that's how we filter our major things. What do you mean you don't remember what the guy's looking like? That's actually a quote, because one of my girlfriends said, what do you mean you don't remember? You went on a date, the car broke down. I remember the whole thing. I was like, I don't remember anything. Put it in a book.
So I only have a little bit to add to that, and that back when way back a half an hour ago when I was telling you how when I wanted to write my first book, it wasn't because I wanted to do better, but I wanted to be part of this thing that was so great. There was actually one thing that I can remember purposely saying to myself that I wanted in the book that I wrote, and that was a strong female friendship. Because that was something at the time that I wasn't seeing that much of in romance novels, or really in many novels. This is before chick lit was a big thing. And a lot of times when people are writing novels, you isolate the protagonist. By having them emotionally isolated in some way, it can make them very interesting. It can give them an interesting backstory. I didn't want that. And so in my very first book, I wrote, the heroine had this cousin, and dang it, they were really good friends. And you know what? There was a mother there too. And she wasn't even a bad mother. And I have to say, one of the things I'm most proud of in my career is that I wrote this series called The Bridgertons, which I think was my most popular series. Thank you. And you know what? There's a mother, and she's a good mother, and people really love her. And I love that I was able to take this character across 8 books, and she grew more than any other character I've ever written because she was in 8 books. And I just thought it was so nice to have this strong female influence. And so that is something that I do aspire to in my books, is to have to show some sort of friendship or female bond, because even if you're just using it, or it seems like, and sometimes you're using it as a way to move the plot along, because boy, when you get the women together, they can really talk, and you know, you can figure out what's going on when, you know, when your girlfriend asks you, well, what happened next, and then you can, all this happened. I just think it's a good thing to show, and it's a good thing to feel. And so that was the one thing that I did do on purpose, and I have been continuing to on purpose. The rest of it sometimes feels like an accident, but that I meant to do.
Now that I think about it, though, sometimes female friendships aren't perfect. And, you know, you both like the same guy, or you fight or have a falling out or whatever. I don't know that we have really delved into that in romance. I haven't.
Totally did, actually.
You did? Okay, did I?
Yeah, I did have this great scene where, like, it was cousins, and I was proud of this too, because I was worried, because a lot of times readers will say, we don't want you to write perfect women, no more Mary Sues, and then you go and you give them somebody who's multifaceted and flawed, and they get really ticked off at you, and they're just like,
they do.
I can't believe she did that. So I did write this thing where one cousin kind of called another cousin out on something, like in public. And it forced her really rather publicly to kind of be like, am I really like that? And so, yeah, so I have done that. I have had some things come out where it's not always perfect, and they have to learn how to get back to being friends again.
Can I just put a plug in for, I would really like to see the evil other woman trope die like horrible death in a ditch. Like, I'm so tired. I hate that trope. I hate oh, she really wanted him, and now we're villains, and she's gonna pour hot acid on me, or what. I mean, it's bananas, and I'd like to see it go away. It's just PSA.
All right, so I think we have time for one more question. You're closer, lucky day.
Hi, I'm kind of new to this community, and I was just learning about something called virgin theatrics. And since this is a feminism in romance novels, I wanted to talk a little about that, ask you guys, even like the name is kind of awful, but I've noticed there's a trend in all of your books. I mean, you have mostly widows, so that's not really your thing.
Plenty of virgins. Been there, done that.
But do you think it's taking the Regency eras that you guys usually write in, or those kinds of eras, and twisting it more towards modern times to have that be less of a thing? Was that a conscious choice, or?
There's nothing that gets you hate mail faster than writing a non-virgin in a historical novel. I can attest to that myself on a number of levels. I've written a single mother. I've written a woman who's very proud of her, sexual identity. It's hard. I mean, I've heard from readers who say, I can't read your books unless somebody tells me on Goodreads that the heroine is a virgin. I mean, virginity in romance novels is a really interesting, it's a fascinating construct, and I think it is about that sort of sense of you can only, it's true of widows too, though, in the sense that like even oftentimes widows in romance novels are sort of faux virgins in the sense that they either didn't love their husband.
Not mine.
Well, first, there's like
Not mine.
First of all, no, and I want you to talk about that because it does feel that way, right? Like, first of all, there's a trope called the virgin widow, which literally is like they got married, she never and then he died before they had sex, and then she's married and she's a widow but also a virgin, and it's very bonkers. But if you're interested, I can recommend some books. But also there's this sense of even a widow can only love this one man. And so sex has to be special with this one man and never before. And that's not what Eloisa writes.
I haven't done that, and you haven't either.
No,
But I will say, I haven't done that. I've done A Virgin Widow. It's a novella. It's totally fun.
Everyone has to write at least one.
It's kind of like Amnesia, right? She got Amnesia.
I did my Amnesia.
At some point, if your career's long enough, you hit The Virgin Widow. But
no, I'm going to try to
thing
avoid
is
that one.
That, losing my virginity is one of my most intense memories. Was not that much fun, right? It really wasn't. But I think for a lot of people, it's a signal moment. And when you're writing a romance, or when you're constructing a romance, you really want to hit the signal moments. And if you're writing historical romance, virgin theatrics is not, it's not a simple thing. They mostly were virgins. So Maya, bless her heart, ignores historics. It's a little harder for me because, man, you want hate mail? You try being a Shakespeare professor who got, this date wrong by 1 year. The hate mail's insane. So I do try to stick with it, which means that you end up writing a lot of virgins. And then it's like, okay, I have another virgin. What kind of virgin is she going to be? I would say the kind I dislike the most. The kind I dislike the most is like, ow, that hurts. Oh my God, you're so big. Woo! Orgasm. Insane orgasm.
She wrote the best bad first sex scene I've ever read once. People just having a really bad first experience.
I think it's crucial for romance. And you know what? You get more and more letters. I don't know which, because I've written several of them, but I wrote one that was rewriting Romeo and Juliet. It was called Once Upon a Tower. Terrible sex, because Romeo and Juliet, they're both virgins, right? So, ghastly times 2. I got so many letters, and sadly enough, for any of those of you who are Mormons, a lot of them from Mormon women who were like, oh my God, this was exactly what happened to me. And then you realize, again, okay, you're writing virginity, but you're rewriting it for some people, you're creating a fantasy for some people, you're providing a secondary story for others. It serves the population in so many different ways.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I still write my Regency virgins because it's hard to write around it. But I wrote about this in my book about the romance genre, Dangerous Books for Girls, The Bad Reputation of Romance Explained. It's going for the longest
Which is great.
Title ever. Yeah. Thank you. But I think because we often in romance go to such great lengths to have our heroines be virgins, hence the virgin widow, to me that was there's something else going on here. And I think a lot of what it is these stories are about the awakening of a woman. It's her sexual awakening. It's her as a fully loved, embracing herself, human awakening. It's happening on a lot of levels. And the virginity is, some of it's historical, but some of it's a very easy and direct way to bring that reader to that sexual awakening and stuff.
Well, it also codes the slut, right? in the sense of, when we talk about romance through the ages, when we talk about why rape was so prevalent in early historicals and in early romances, what we're often talking about is this sense of like, if you were forced to have an orgasm, then you didn't choose to be slutty, right?
So it was
like
okay.
Your sexual identity is liberated through a man and not through your own choice, right? And that's when those early sort of rape books, the books where there is rape, they often are called, it's often called forced seduction, or at least it was in the 80s and 90s, referred to as forced seduction, because good girls don't give it up, right? And we still live in that here now when we write, when we see, we all try really hard not to live in it, but The Virgin also sort of codes as like, well, she's pure and she's not slutty. And, it's 2017, so let's be done with that.
But I also want to add that even though it's not what I choose to write or even what I usually choose to read, there are some people who truly do want to read a rape fantasy. And I think we need to respect that and respect their ability to understand what is fantasy and what is reality and what they might choose to have in their own life. And I think that's true. I have a lot of trouble with, when I hear people saying like, oh, the unrealistic expectations, like my readers can't tell the difference between real life and what they're reading in a book. And if that's what they want to read and that makes them happy, then I'm not going to say, it's wrong unless it's, possibly going out and teaching them to be in a relationship where they're subjugated, or I don't know. But I know a lot of very, very strong, liberated women who do enjoy reading things that they would never, ever want to take part in real life. And I think we need to respect that as well.
Well, and romance is it's part of the joy of romance, right? Is that it's such a safe space for kink. Like, nobody's going to judge you for it.
Dragon shifters, blue aliens. We can just keep going, right?
Somebody told me about a hedgehog shifter book, which I thought sounded really, really painful. I don't know. Yeah. But hey, if it's what you want, it's okay.
As long as it's consensual.
I feel like we could talk about this for probably 6 more hours, but I think we're out of time. So I just, on a final note, kind of want to end it not on hedgehog shapeshifters. What is one fantastic feminist romance you are looking forward to reading this summer? Or that you recommend other people read this summer?
Well, you might know, so Sarah MacLean also has a day job as a reviewer for the Washington Post, so she gets to read everything. So we may before all the rest of us.
Do you have anything that you're reading?
Yeah, definitely. She wants to read my book.
No, do you have anything that you've been reading that's great?
I don't get to read the things. Ilona Andrews has a fantastic book out today called White Hot, which has got an alpha, but she's... I'm about halfway through it. It is the best. It's absolutely wonderful. So if you have any inclination towards urban paranormal, Ilona Andrews is the top, and White Hot you should get.
There's a terrific Alicia Rye coming out called Hate to Want You. If you have never read Alicia Rye, you all need to go home and read a book called Serving Pleasure, which is glorious, but super feminist is her book, Gentleman in the Street. The heroine is the billionaire in that one, which is really nice little twist. And they're bananas sexy. They're so romantic.
Wait. They're actual bananas?
No.
Okay. I'm just checking. It's just good to know.
They're so romantic, and she has a new series coming out. Then the book is out in end of July. I'm looking at everyone. Hate to Want You. It's delicious.
Okay, I got to say, I assume you all are going to buy Julia's book because here it is, and it came out today. But Sarah's is also out in a month, and I got to read that one in an ARC. And again, he doesn't grovel. He's too desperately in love to get a word out. So you really have to read that. Tell me what the name of it is again.
The Day of the Duchess.
The Day of the Duchess.
And also, I travel because I like to talk about romance novels a real lot, you guys. So I travel with a list of, like, in this case, 15 romances I really liked over the last year, and there's a bigger list on my website, so come get a card and read all these books too.
That's so cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you to the audience for being here.